One sip of my morning coffee for a single XRP, except now that coin is worth $1,000. It sounds like science fiction, right? Well, keep listening because by the end of this story, you're going to wonder if it's actually next year's breakfast. Okay, so picture me last Saturday. I'm in line at a cafe that insists on calling a small cup tiny, which somehow costs more than my old phone bill. Now I pull out my phone to kind of kill the wait, and my crypto feed is basically a boxing match. In the left corner, the dreamers, XRP to $1,000, lock it in. In the right, well, the skeptics, right? Stop dreaming, start dollar cost averaging into index funds, you lunatics. Now I swear, my thumb got whiplash just from scrolling back and forth. And that's kind of where the inner math nerd in me kind of whispered, all right, let's actually run the numbers. How wild would the world need to get for this to happen? First up, today's reality check. Now, as I'm recording this, XRP is hovering around $2 and some change. Let's call it $2.20 so that the math stays pretty friendly. Now, circulating out there are roughly 58.4 billion tokens. Now, multiply that $2.20 by 58.4 billion, and you land on a market cap just north of $127 billion. 100+ billion is nothing to sneeze at, right? Now, it's kind of the GDP of Ukraine or, hungover Greece, if you will. But in global finance terms, it's still only a mid-sized yacht compared to the ocean liner that is Apple at 3 trillion or Bitcoin at about 1.8 trillion. Now, crank XRP's price dial all the way up to a clean 1,000. Now, $1,000, times 58.4 billion coins equals $58.4 trillion. Now that number is so big, it makes my calculator kind of wheeze. It's bigger than gold's entire market cap, about $22 trillion, plus Apple's 3 and Bitcoin's 2, and honestly, most of everything else that people buy, sell, or brag about at dinner parties. Now pretend that every skyscraper in Manhattan suddenly kind of stapled property of Ripple, to its deeds. Well, you'd still need to toss in a downtown Tokyo and a couple of Alps to bridge the shortfall. So any kind of sane person's first reaction is, that's absurd, right? And on the surface, sure, a 49,900% price jump doesn't just break records, it punts them into orbit. But before we kind of roll our eyes so hard that we sprain an optic nerve, let's do what crypto folks love, examine the edge cases, because impossible in tech has a funny way of turning into a Tuesday. Let's start with utility, XRP's big calling card. Right, you can move value around the planet in 2 or 3 seconds for a fraction of a penny. Now, I tried it last month, and a buddy of mine owed me some money for a shared hotel, and my bank wanted, $45 and 3 business days to get the cash to Brazil. Now, I whipped out a non-custodial wallet, zipped him the equivalent of $50 in XRP, and by the time I refreshed the transaction list, the balance was already on his end. Now, he actually kind of replied with kind of that wide-eyed emoji people that use when their brains just absolutely explode. And that's the speed and cost advantage, that's really hard to ignore, especially for banks bleeding billions of dollars every year in intermediary fees. So here's the monster addressable market, SWIFT. Right, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, fancy name for messaging network that your bank uses to say, hey, send Nick's money to Brazil and don't you dare lose track of it. Now, SWIFT moves about $5 trillion a day. Now, if XRP captures 10%, that's $500 billion in daily settlements. And even a kind of 1% slice is $50 billion dancing across ledgers in seconds. Now imagine Swift as they kind of traffic-clogged 4-lane highway. RippleNet is, dangling a kind of maglev train, above it saying you can hop on for half a cent. Now, if enough passengers climb aboard, price pressure does what price pressure does best. But here comes the awkward elephant balancing on a bar stool: supply. Now, Bitcoin kind of flaunts its scarcity like a luxury handbag, only 21 million coins ever, period. XRP, tens of billions, with another billion dripping out of escrow every single month. That's kind of like refilling a punch bowl at a party where half the guests are already tipsy. Still, Ripple's escrow kind of facet is not a time bomb dilution. Right, the company actually routinely relocks up unused drops if demand feels short. So picture a kind of bartender who only tops up your glass when you're actually thirsty. It kind of moderates the shock, but can of course delete the fact that more tokens, at least because it can't delete the fact that more tokens actually exist. Then there's the regulatory barbed wire. Now in the US, XRP is still shaking off courtroom bruises from that SEC slugfest, though recent rulings finally kind of offered a slither of clarity. Overseas, the reception's actually been a lot warmer. You've got Dubai's VARA high-fiving Ripple, you've got Singapore handing them a license, and European banks are at least peeking over from their reading glasses at the on-demand liquidity pilots. But you don't just usher in a multi-trillion-dollar asset class, without every regulator on planet Earth wanting to look under the hood. And then, of course, test drive, then maybe even lunch, dessert, and a background check on your pet goldfish. Okay, I hear you. Competition. Well, it's fierce. Now, Stellar, of course, wants the same cross-border pie. JP Morgan has a JP coin, doing bank-to-bank laps behind closed doors. Visa's experimenting with tokenized, dollars, because why should banks have all the fun? Now, instant payments is the new streaming wars, right? Every kind of Netflix, spawns 5 copycats, right? For XRP to dominate, it needs to not only be the fastest train, but also have the cheapest tickets, the cushiest kind of seats, and of course, the most convenient stations. And yet, optimism persists. Enter Matthew, right? Crypto executive and proud owner of Titanium Strength Hopium. Now, he says that $1,000 XRP by 2035 feels doable. That's just 10 short years, 1 World Cup, and if my kind of bones hold up, maybe half a mortgage away. Now, the thesis here is that the payments market is multi-trillion-dollar territory. Snag a piece and you're kind of golden. Now, Patrick Bet David, yes, the YouTuber turned financial pundit, agrees in spirit, right? Now, he kind of claims XRP could tag $1,000 by digesting just a kind of morsel of kind of Swift's daily throughput. There's no timeline, but the insinuation is sooner rather than kind of your grandchildren's inheritance. Meanwhile, of course, you've got Telegon, the analytics shop, seemingly kind of staffed by, accuracy's kind of sipping chamomile tea, says nah, right? Capping XRP at $285 by 2050. Changely, more adventurous, I guess, flags 2040 for their $1,000 line in the sand. So you can place your chips, folks, and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What year do you think XRP would hit your $1,000? So let me toss in a little stress test. Take your current supply, 58.4 billion coins, knock it down by a hypothetical 10% thanks to lost wallets, burnt dust, and, well, couch cushion mishaps maybe. That's 52.5 billion coins. Now assume Ripple buys and locks another 5 billion for corporate treasuries and central bank sandbox projects. Well, we're at 47.5 billion. Cool. Still enormous, but, smaller. Now, suppose global GDP climbs, from roughly $105 trillion today to, say, $150 trillion by 2035. If digital assets roughly absorb 20% of that value as liquidity, then we're looking at roughly a $30 trillion pie. So could XRP command half? That's a tall order, but it's not cosmic in kind of a digital economy kind of scenario. Now, that alone would justify about $315 per coin. Push adoption higher, tighten supply a bit more, sprinkle in a little bit of speculative fourth, and the path to quadruple digits, it kind of flickers on the horizon. It's not guaranteed, but just not mathematically insane. But numbers only tell half the story. Culture tells the rest. Now, for XRP to surge, people need to trust it like they trust their morning alarm. There's no small pivot. Money, of course, is religion, right? We treat dollars and euros with scarce relevance because generations have done the same. Now, convincing Aunt Linda that some ledger operated by a private company, yet theoretically decentralized but also kind of centralized, is the new standard, well, that conversation better come with some free cookies. And here's the day in the life kind of thought experiment then, right? It's 2035. I tap a barista robot because humans have better things to do apparently, and pay with XRP straight from my biometric wallet. Now, the machine confirms funds in under 2 seconds because settlement is final. I board a metro that tokenized my fare on the fly. The operator hedges currency risk in real time using the same liquidity pool. My friend, streams me kind of micro royalties because my AI voice plugin cameoed in her ebook, right? Every kind of hop, happens on rails that kind of spark or at least speak, interledger protocol here, with XRP bridging yen to pesos to, euros to dollars, right? Invisibly. Now, in that world, $1,000 XRP tag isn't actually weird. It's kind of the background noise, like how nobody gasps at $1 million Manhattan condo anymore. Society simply inflated around it. And yet, the same vision that kind of reveals the stakes. Now, if XRP fails, the pipes still need laying, maybe by Stellar, maybe by CBDCs with different smart contract kickers. Now, the win condition, isn't XRP or bust. It's instant value transfer for 8 billion humans. Now, XRP's odds improve if it stands alone as a kind of neutral Switzerland of liquidity. They shrink if central banks insist on walled gardens, or if another token offers similar speed with fewer PR scars. Now, remember those monthly escrow unlocks? Well, critics compare them to a facet left running during a drought. But Ripple's latest quarterly report shows that on average, they actually relock nearly 80%. So it's more like a kind of, piggy bank that you jump into as and when you need, but ultimately it goes all the way back in. So let's say you have a piggy bank and you want to get, a couple of dollars out of it. You smash the entire piggy bank in order to take $2 out, and you put, $98 back in or $90 back in, for example, right? Now, it's really interesting when you take a look at it from this kind of perspective, because you only really fill the bucket as demand swells here, right? Moreover, Ripple's incursion into CBDC pilots, could actually eventually eat into that unlocked supply as official channels hold XRP for liquidity backing. So just imagine local treasuries kind of squirreling away coins the way that airlines hoard jet fuel futures. Scarcity is actually relative here. But let's not sugarcoat, the hurricane, if you will, right? Banks, they hate change. Seriously, right? They still fax things today. Compliance departments move slower than glaciers kind of bringing melatonin. And governments, well, they'll poke holes in every new payment rail like cats testing cardboard. Now, one data privacy scare, one high-profile hack, or one spectacular exchange collapse could freeze public sentiment for years. But innovation loves gridlock, right? Once the old system's kind of rust becomes too expensive, even risk-adverse CEOs sign off on fresh pipes. Now, for the spicy part, the climax, if you will. Pretend regulators wake up tomorrow in a global Zoom call and agree, all right, enough paper pushing. RippleNet checks out. Let's clear the runway. Now, suddenly, every correspondent bank, remittance shop, and fintech app starts pushing a software update. Now, you could watch price charts leapfrog like popcorn. right? Liquidity, begets more liquidity. Traders front run institutional flows. Retail FOMO lights up like TikTok with cringe dance tutorials about XRP flipping gold. And you cue mainstream news segments, where anchors clutch coffee cups and ask if you can buy crypto on your 401k. Now, within months, utility, kind of pushes joints out of sockets, if you will, that we didn't even know markets had. $1,000 doesn't materialize overnight, right? Price discovery always needs to have some breathers, but the kind of trajectory kind of bends hard upwards here. And so, could the dream die on the runway? Absolutely. Maybe a faster protocol steals the spotlight. Maybe global stablecoin standards, make bridge assets redundant. Or maybe macro turbulence, war, credit crisis, alien invasions. I mean, why stop listing, right? Slams the appetites for experimental plumbing. Now, in that kind of universe, XRP's utility, it still matters, but price tops out, closer to Changeley's or Telegon's kind of sober ranges. And so, where does that leave us then? Well, I kind of land somewhere in the grey, right? Bullish on instant payments, cautious on 4-digit predictions. Now, I see an achievable kind of ladder here. $5 if legal clarity spreads, $20 if traditional finance migrates en masse, maybe $200 or $300 if central banks plug in wholesale. Now, beyond that, we need a kind of once-in-a-century pivot in how humanity exchanges value. Does history ever kind of oblige? Sometimes. Now, the internet rewired information in a decade and left print newspapers wondering what hit them. If money is next, well, $1,000 XRP might be the kind of headline that you kind of screenshot to prove that you're not hallucinating. Now, before we kind of wrap up, quick personal invite here. Hop into our free crypto Discord server. There's a link in the description down below. Now, we've got chart junkies, debating Fibonacci levels, devs dissecting code commits, and night owls sharing memes about gas fees. Now, if you want a front row seat to the liquidity revolution or someone to kind of panic with, during market dips, we've got your back. And so, could that single XRP eventually pay for your rent, your groceries, or your Netflix but not Netflix subscription? The math says yes, under very specific and very dramatic conditions. The world building required is monumental here, right? But history keeps surprising us with plot twists. I'm kind of stacking a manageable bag, enough that it won't hurt if I lose it, but also, change my zip code if the stars do in fact align. And I'm comfortable kind of parking it for a decade to see, what humans actually cook up.